Air did not merely enter Simone's lungs. It crashed into her like a tidal wave, sharp and burning, as if her body had forgotten the simple mechanics of being alive. The ballroom lights blurred into streaks of gold and crystal as her chest heaved, panic and disbelief tangling together. One moment, there had been antiseptic smells, the mechanical beeping of machines, the suffocating stillness of a deathbed. The next, there was weight beneath her feet, music humming through the floor, and the unmistakable sensation of standing upright in a living, breathing body. Her eyes flew open with desperate urgency, scanning the world as if it might dissolve at any second. She was not surrounded by white sheets or whispered condolences. She was standing in the center of opulence. Slowly, almost fearfully, she looked down at herself. The hospital gown she remembered was gone. In its place clung a stunning silver sequined engagement dress, fabric catching the chandelier, light and scattering it like shattered stars across the polished floor. Every breath she took confirmed the impossible truth. She lifted her hands in front of her face, turning them over as though they belonged to someone else. They were full and strong, the skin a deep bronze glow she had not seen in years. There were no IV marks, no bruises, no tremor of weakness beneath the surface. These were the hands of a woman at the peak of her life, not one hovering on the edge of death. The realization sent a shudder through her entire body, equal parts terror and awe.
Simone, are you okay?
The voice cut through her thoughts with surgical precision. A hand settled on her shoulder, warm and possessive, as though it had every right to be there. The contact was enough to trigger a violent reaction. Simone flinched hard, her body acting before her mind could intervene, and her elbow struck a nearby table. A champagne flute tipped, wobbled in slow motion, and then shattered against the marble floor. The sharp crash echoed far louder than it should have, slicing through the elegant murmur of the party. She turned, breath shallow, heart hammering so loudly it drowned out the orchestra. Standing before her was a man she knew far too well, 10 years younger, handsome, impeccably tailored. His smile was perfect, down to the last practiced curve, a smile she had once mistaken for love and now recognized as something hollow and rehearsed. Ji-hoon looked exactly as he had on the night her life first went wrong.
You look pale, babe. Are you nervous about the speech?
Simone did not answer immediately. She stared at him, really stared, as if committing every familiar detail to memory with new, merciless clarity. The sound of her own heartbeat roared in her ears, each thud a reminder that this was not a hallucination. Slowly, she forced herself to look away from his face and take in the room around them. Crystal chandeliers dripped light from the ceiling. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits laughed softly. Massive banners declared, in elegant lettering, "Congratulations, Ji-hoon and Simone." Her gaze snagged on a digital clock near the stage, December 24th, 2024. The numbers glowed with quiet indifference, as if they were not rewriting the laws of reality. The truth settled into her bones, with chilling certainty. She had gone back. Not hours, not days. 10 full years, rewinding her life to the precise moment it had been sealed. To the night she had smiled for cameras and unknowingly engaged herself to the devil.
Simone, the chairman is waiting. We need to announce the merger.
At his words, rage erupted inside her, sudden and volcanic. A heat so intense it threatened to scorch her composure. Images flickered behind her eyes, betrayals, quiet humiliations, the slow erosion of her power, and finally the sterile stillness of a room where she had taken her last breath. But Simone was not a reckless woman. Long before she had been a wife, she had been a CEO. She drew in a careful breath, forcing the fury down into something sharp and controlled. I am alive, and I have the ultimate weapon, hindsight. The thought anchored her, steadying her spine and her voice. This time, she would not be a pawn stumbling blindly into his carefully laid trap. I am fine. Actually, I need a moment to powder my nose.
Hurry up. Do not embarrass me.
The pressure of his fingers sent a cold clarity through her. This was the man she had once defended, once loved, once trusted with her future. Without hesitation, Simone pulled her arm away. When she looked at him again, there was no warmth left in her eyes, only ice. The intensity of her gaze was so unexpected, so utterly devoid of submission, that Ji-hoon actually took a step back, confusion flickering across his perfect expression. I would not dream of it. She turned and walked out of the ballroom, her heels striking the floor with quiet authority. The music and laughter faded behind her, replaced by the hushed corridors of the hotel. She did not head toward the bathroom as she had claimed. Instead, her steps carried her deeper into the building, toward a part of the Shilla Hotel most guests pretended did not exist. The forbidden wing loomed ahead, its lighting dimmer, its atmosphere heavy with unspoken history. These private suites were reserved for the Han family's outcasts, the relatives spoken of only in whispers. Simone knew exactly who was staying there tonight. In her past life, she had ignored the rumors about Han Do-yoon, the older brother. They had called him crazy. They had said he was crippled, broken, unfit to stand under the family name. She had believed them because it had been easier than questioning the narrative. But on her deathbed, truth had finally slipped through the cracks. Ji-hoon's voice, low and careless, whispered to Chloe as if Simone were already gone. My brother is the only one I fear. Thank God we crippled his reputation before he could take the throne. The memory burned brighter than any warning she had ever ignored. If Ji-hoon feared him, Simone needed him. And this time, she would not look away. Suite 404 existed in a perpetual state of twilight. The curtains were never fully open, never fully closed, allowing the city skyline to bleed in through narrow gaps like cold veins of light. Neon signs pulsed faintly against the glass, their reflections trembling across the dark room. Outside, snow drifted downward in slow, deliberate spirals, muffling the city below and turning the world into something distant and unreal. The silence inside was heavy and oppressive, broken only by the low hum of electricity and the faint whisper of winter pressing against the windows. By the window sat a man in a wheelchair, his body angled toward the snow as if it were the only thing worth looking at. Han Do-yoon did not move. He watched the falling white with an intensity that bordered on obsession, as though each flake carried a memory or a warning. Shadows carved his features into sharp relief, emphasizing the stillness of someone who had learned patience the hard way, someone who waited, endured, and survived. The door opened without ceremony. Simone stepped inside as if she owned the room, the building, and the night itself. She did not hesitate or pause to assess the danger. Her hand reached back and turned the lock with a decisive click that echoed too loudly in the dark, announcing that she was not here to retreat.
Get out.
His voice was rough and unused, like a blade pulled from its sheath after years of neglect. It carried no heat or raised volume, only authority worn thin by isolation. No. She walked further in, her footsteps slow and measured, heels striking the floor with deliberate calm. Each step shortened the distance between them, collapsing the fragile illusion that he was alone and untouchable. The darkness seemed to bend around her as she moved, recognizing something dangerous entering its domain. Do-yoon turned the wheelchair around with smooth, controlled movement, revealing a man who had never truly surrendered command of his body. Even seated, his presence filled the room like a storm on the horizon. Long, slightly messy hair fell across his forehead, shadowing eyes as sharp as obsidian, while his black silk shirt clung to his frame in quiet defiance.
You're the bride, lost your way to the slaughterhouse?
The curl of his lip was subtle but unmistakable, contempt sharpened by bitter amusement. He had read about her and reduced her to a pawn in someone else's game, and seeing her here disrupted that narrative. I'm not the bride, not anymore. I'm here to make you a proposal. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that the tension between them became almost physical. Her posture was straight and unflinching, her eyes stripped of hesitation and filled with intent.
I have nothing to offer. I'm a cripple. I'm disowned.
The words were delivered flatly, a script he had recited often enough to dull its meaning. It was armor polished by repetition, meant to deflect interest and invite dismissal. Stop acting, you aren't crippled. The room changed, the air sharpening into something lethal. Do-yun went utterly still as silence stretched brittle and dangerous between them.
What did you say?
His gaze hardened, years of restraint coiling beneath his calm as the predator beneath the disguise began to stir. I said, stand up. I know your legs work. I know the skiing accident was a cover-up for the assassination attempt your stepmother ordered. I know you're pretending to be disabled to stay off their radar while you buy up their subsidiary stocks through shell companies. Each sentence landed with controlled force as Do-yun reassessed her in silence. His hand drifted toward the drawer beside him, the unspoken possibility of violence hanging between them.
Who are you, a spy?
The accusation was quiet but heavy, weighted with the knowledge that men had died for knowing less. I'm a woman who wants to see the Han family burn, and I know you have the matches. Do-yun laughed, a dark and dry sound stripped of warmth, echoing briefly before dissolving into the shadows.
And why should I trust the woman who is about to marry my enemy?
Because I'm not going to marry him. I'm going to marry you. Silence swallowed the room as Do-yun studied her and saw the fire she did not hide. This was not the woman described in his files, but a predator choosing her battlefield.
Marry me? I'm the disgrace of the family.
Exactly. Imagine the humiliation for Ji-hoon, his fiancée leaving him at the altar for his crippled brother. It would tank the stock price, and that's when we buy. Do-yun's eyes narrowed as the gambler in him awakened. Slowly and deliberately, he placed his hands on the armrests of the wheelchair, grounding himself. Then he stood, the motion unhurried and ceremonial, rising to his full height with contained power. There was nothing weak about him, only restraint held by choice. He walked toward her and circled slowly, close enough to catch the faint trace of her perfume and commit it to memory.
You realize that if you marry me, you enter the war zone. I don't play safe.
I'm done playing safe. I want blood. Do-yun smirked, the expression both devastating and terrifying, the smile of a man who had found a worthy accomplice.
Then let's go crash a party.
The ballroom held its breath as the doors swung open, the heavy panels parting with a resonant echo that rippled across marble and crystal. Light spilled inward, catching on champagne flutes and jeweled gowns, as if the room itself leaned forward in expectation. At the far end, the stage glowed beneath chandeliers, and the murmurs that had filled the air moments before thinned into a brittle silence, sharp enough to cut.
And now I'd like to invite my beautiful fiancée.
Ji-hoon stood center stage, microphone steady in his hand, the practiced smile of an heir fixed to his face. The words were ceremonial, polished by rehearsals and family expectations. Yet before the invitation could settle, footsteps crossed the threshold, measured and deliberate, redirecting every gaze away from the stage and toward the open doors. Simone walked in, but not toward the stage as everyone assumed. Her path cut through the center aisle, unhurried and commanding. She pushed a wheelchair forward, the soft whir of its movement unnervingly loud in the hush. In the chair sat Han Do-yun, pale and frail in appearance, a tuxedo hastily chosen from his own closet draped over his frame, the contrast between rumor and reality tightening the room like a drawn wire. A collective gasp swept the crowd in a wave of disbelief. Chairs scraped as people half stood and half froze. At the head table, the chairman surged to his feet, fury flushing his face, as authority crackled in the air and demanded answers no one seemed ready to give.
What is the meaning of this? Why is he here?
Simone stopped in the very center of the ballroom, precisely where every sightline converged. The spotlight snapped onto her, bleaching color from everything else and turning the world into a stage she alone controlled. She took the microphone from a stunned waiter, her fingers steady and her posture unyielding, as if this moment had always belonged to her. "I have an announcement." Her voice carried clear and strong, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Tonight was supposed to be an engagement, and it is." She turned her gaze to Ji-hoon. The distance between them felt immeasurable now, crowded with betrayal and unspoken truths. Confusion flickered across his face, a crack in the polished facade he had worn moments before.
Simone, what are you doing?
Simone smiled then, a curve of her lips that held no warmth. It was a smile honed by resolve and sharpened by clarity. The ballroom seemed to shrink around her as she spoke, every word weighted with finality. "I realized something tonight, Ji-hoon. I realized that I cannot marry a man who lacks integrity, a man who—" She paused and let the silence stretch, her eyes drifting to Chloe in the front row. The pause was precise, exposing what had been hidden in shadow. "Cheats with my maid of honor." The eruption was instantaneous. Voices collided and flashbulbs detonated in rapid succession, bathing the room in harsh white bursts. Ji-hoon's color drained away as reality closed in, his protest sounding thin against the roar of the crowd.
Simone, you're crazy.
She did not flinch. Instead, she lifted her chin and raised her voice above the chaos with unwavering conviction, redirecting the narrative as easily as one turns a page. "But I still believe in the Han family's potential, just not you." She turned back to the wheelchair, to the man everyone had written off. The spotlight followed obediently. Her next words were declarative, an invitation and a challenge at once. "Do-yun oppa, will you marry me?" The chairman's face contorted, shock warring with rage, as if the ground beneath his legacy had fractured.
Stop this madness. He is a cripple.
Do-yun looked up at Simone, the corner of his mouth lifting in a private smile meant for her alone. Then, with deliberate slowness, he pushed himself up. The room convulsed with disbelief as he stood, leaving the wheelchair behind like a discarded lie. Gasps rang out as he straightened, buttoned his jacket, and claimed the space that had always been his. He walked to Simone, every step rewriting history. Taking the microphone, he faced his father and brother, his presence unassailable and his gaze unyielding.
I accept. And since I am the first son, by family law, this engagement supersedes my brother's.
He pulled Simone into a kiss meant for spectacle and declaration. Yet the instant their lips met, pretense dissolved. Heat flared, possessive and electric, and Simone melted into him, fingers clutching his lapels as the ballroom vanished from view.
Get your hands off her.
Do-yun broke the kiss and turned, his eyes cold as winter glass when they settled on his brother. The line was drawn in front of everyone who mattered.
Careful, little brother. She's your sister-in-law now.
The Han estate stood like a monument to old power, its stone and steel soaked in generations of ambition, betrayal, and bloodless wars waged behind closed doors. The annex, tucked just far enough from the main house to be labeled separate, yet close enough to feel constantly watched, had become a quiet battlefield. 1 month after the marriage, the walls of the annex seemed to breathe with tension, as if the building itself were aware that something dangerous and transformative was unfolding within its rooms. Life with Do-yun was not gentle, nor was it calm. It was a constant collision of wills, intellects, and unspoken desire. On paper, They were husband and wife, bound by legal documents and family pressure. In reality, they were co-conspirators sharing a fragile truce. Their proximity was deliberate provocation, a daily reminder to the Han family that Do-yun had chosen defiance over obedience, and that Simone was not a temporary inconvenience, but a permanent disruption. Simone was never content to play the ornamental role expected of her. She was not merely occupying space beside Do-yun, she was reshaping it. In the study, light from multiple monitors washed over her face, turning her sharp focus into something almost otherworldly. Financial charts, surveillance feeds, and internal documents hovered around her like weapons laid out on a strategist's table, each one a potential strike against the family empire. Ji-hoon is investing heavily in the biotech merger. I have a feeling that company is falsifying their clinical trials. Do-yun observed her from behind his desk, his posture relaxed in a way that would have been impossible weeks earlier. He was shirtless and unapologetic, the lines of his body speaking of restrained violence and disciplined strength. The amber liquid in his glass caught the light as he lifted it, a quiet symbol of how little he felt the need to shield himself from her now. Around Simone, his defenses had thinned, not out of weakness, but trust.
You have very specific feelings, Simone. You predicted the shipping strike last week, too.
The air between them tightened, thick with implication. Simone did not look away, though her pulse quickened. Every comment like this was a test, a subtle probe into how much she knew and why. Do-yun was not a man who ignored patterns, and she could feel his curiosity sharpening into something dangerous. I'm intuitive. Do-yun rose from his chair and crossed the room with unhurried confidence. Each step closed the distance, each second stretching unbearably long. When he reached her, he placed his hands on the back of her chair, effectively caging her in. The move was half jest, half dominance, and entirely deliberate.
You're a witch or a time traveler.
Simone's body betrayed her before her mind could react, muscles tightening in instinctive defense. He was too perceptive and too close to the truth she kept buried beneath layers of calculated lies. The weight of his presence pressed in on her senses, heat and danger wrapped together. Does it matter? He leaned down, invading her space completely. His cheek brushed against hers, the contact fleeting yet electric, sending a shiver down her spine. The scent of whiskey and something darker surrounded her, blurring the line between threat and comfort.
No, as long as you're my witch.
What they shared could not be simplified into affection or alliance. It was a carefully choreographed dance, each step measured and each pause loaded with meaning. They slept in the same bed for appearances, bodies separated by inches that felt more dangerous than miles. They had not crossed the line, but the line itself had become fragile, fraying under the weight of unspoken hunger. Every brush of skin and every lingering glance felt like a spark hovering over spilled gasoline. His hand grazed her shoulder as she spoke, leaving her voice unsteady. We need to accelerate the plan. The chairman is planning to transfer the master shares to Ji-hoon on his birthday, next week. Do-yun's expression hardened, the playful edge vanishing as calculation took its place. He had known this moment was coming and had been preparing for it in silence. Power transfers were never ceremonial. They were declarations of war disguised as celebrations.
I know, that's why we are going to expose the slush fund tomorrow.
The words hit Simone like a controlled explosion. Her breath caught as she processed the scale of what he was proposing. This was not a surgical strike. It was annihilation. The slush fund? But that brings down the whole company. Do-yun reached out and turned her chair, forcing her to face him fully. His grip was firm but not cruel, a reminder of his authority and his intent. His eyes burned with something fierce and uncompromising.
Exactly. I don't want to inherit the kingdom, Simone. I want to build a new one. With you. But first we have to burn the old one down.
Silence stretched between them as his gaze dropped to her lips, and lingered there with unmistakable intent. The question that followed was softer and more dangerous for its intimacy.
Are you scared?
Simone felt the past claw its way up her throat, memories she rarely allowed herself to touch. Death was not an abstract fear to her. It was something she had already endured. "I've died once already. I'm not scared of anything except losing." Do-yun's brow furrowed as confusion flashed across his face before being replaced by something darker. He lifted his hand and cupped her face, his touch grounding and possessive.
Died once? Tell me, who killed you?
She searched his eyes and found not doubt, but ferocious protection. In that moment, she understood that he was already standing between her and every threat, real or imagined. Ji-hoon. In another life, he poisoned me. Do-yun did not laugh or dismiss her words as madness. Instead, his expression emptied, his eyes turning cold and endless, a place where mercy did not exist.
Then I will make sure he dies 1,000 times in this one.
The kiss that followed was inevitable and violent in its need. This was no performance for watchful eyes and no calculated display. It was a vow sealed in hunger and shared fury. Papers scattered as he lifted her onto the desk, the world narrowing until there was only heat, breath, and the promise of mutual destruction.
You are mine, in this life and the next and the one before. Mine.
The chairman's birthday gala unfolded inside the main house like a grotesque parody of royalty. Crystal chandeliers rained light onto marble floors, reflecting endlessly and multiplying the excess until it became nauseating. Desserts arrived dusted with real gold leaf, their sweetness cloying and their extravagance obscene. Politicians laughed too loudly as they clasped hands with men whose smiles never reached their eyes, gangsters in tailored suits with violence hidden beneath silk. The air smelled of perfume, money, and moral rot, a suffocating blend that made every breath feel complicit. Ji-hoon basked in it all, soaking up the attention like sunlight. His posture was relaxed and arrogant, his grin practiced and sharp. Every nod from a powerful guest fed his vanity. Every laugh affirmed his belief that the world bent naturally beneath his feet. He leaned toward Chloe, his voice low but triumphant, certain that nothing, no law and no truth, could touch him here on a night built to celebrate his family's untouchable legacy.
Today I become the king.
The words hung in the air, heavy with hubris, swallowed eagerly by the glittering room. Then Simone entered. The room did not fall silent, but something shifted, an almost imperceptible tightening like a held breath. She wore black velvet that absorbed the light instead of reflecting it, a living shadow among jewels. She looked like a widow already past her grief, someone who had stared into the grave long enough to make peace with it. At her side was Do-yun, his presence calm and lethal, every step measured and every glance precise, like a blade kept deliberately sheathed. They moved through the crowd without haste and without apology. Simone's face was composed, but beneath the surface, years of rage and loss were coiled tight and waiting. Do-yun leaned in close enough that only she could hear him, his voice steady and controlled, carrying the weight of inevitability rather than excitement.
Time for the gift.
The lights dimmed gradually, a practiced transition, signaling reverence. Conversations softened and glasses lowered. On the massive screen, guests expected a glowing tribute to the chairman, a carefully edited legacy of benevolence and power. The room settled into anticipation, unaware that history was about to fracture. But the video never came. Instead, the speakers crackled and a voice filled the hall, old, familiar, and unmistakable. It was the chairman's voice, calm and calculating, stripped of ceremony. Each word landed like a hammer blow, exposing the machinery behind the myth. The recording said, "The bridge construction, use the cheap cement. If it collapses, Blame the architect. Just save the money. Shock rippled through the crowd in waves. Mouths fell open and glasses slipped from numb fingers. This was not rumor or accusation. It was confession. The bridge collapse from 5 years ago, the one that had killed 50 people, rose from the past like a mass grave torn open. Grief, long buried under settlements, and silence screamed back into the room. Before anyone could recover, the screen flickered again. A new image appeared, showing Ji-hoon in a hotel room, thick with secrecy. A lobbyist sat across from him as a briefcase changed hands, the gesture casual and transactional. Ji-hoon's recorded voice followed, cold and dismissive, stripped of charm.
Make sure the environmental report disappears. I do not care if the water is toxic.
Pandemonium exploded. Shouts overlapped as guests surged backward and forward all at once. Phones were raised to record, documenting and hungry for collapse. Outside, police sirens wailed closer and closer, their sound slicing through the chaos. Do-yeon stood still amid it all, having measured every second and every distance. The timing was flawless. Ji-hoon lunged through the crowd, his face twisted with fury and panic, zeroing in on Simone as if she were the only solid thing left in a world coming apart. He shoved past bodies, shouting with all composure gone.
You did this.
His arm rose with rage guiding it, intent clear. The moment stretched into something almost unreal. Before his hand could fall, Do-yeon moved and caught Ji-hoon's wrist mid-air, his grip iron and his motion precise. There was a sharp crack, the sound of bone giving way under absolute control. Ji-hoon screamed and collapsed to his knees as pain erased arrogance. His world narrowed to agony and humiliation, his hands shaking with one useless and broken. Do-yeon stood over him, unflinching, a quiet sentinel of consequence. His voice carried just far enough, every word deliberate and layered with meaning only Simone fully understood.
You poison the water. You poison everything you touch. But you will never touch her again.
The police stormed in shouting commands with weapons raised. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing the unmaking of a dynasty in real time. The chairman was pulled forward, handcuffs biting into wrists that had signed death sentences with ease. Ji-hoon was dragged away, sobbing and clutching his shattered arm, reduced to a spectacle. Do-yeon did not watch them fall. His attention was already elsewhere as he turned to Simone, the chaos reflected in her eyes like a storm finally passing.
It is done.
Simone looked around at the wreckage, the lies exposed, the powerful humbled, and the men who had destroyed her life hauled away in disgrace. Something inside her loosened, a weight she had carried for years finally lifting. The ghosts that had followed her and whispered in the dark began to fade. For the first time, the future felt quiet and free. Morning crept into the annex, not with urgency, but with a quiet, almost reverent patience. Pale sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes suspended in the air, like tiny witnesses to everything that had happened the night before. Somewhere beyond these walls, the city was already roaring awake as screens flashed and headlines screamed about the sudden freefall of Han Group stock. An empire had collapsed overnight, and the world was busy counting the debris. Yet here, inside this room, the chaos felt distant, muted, as if it belonged to another universe entirely. Do-yeon knew the numbers by heart already. Through layers of shell companies and perfectly timed decisions, he now held the majority share. He was the owner of what remained, the ruins of a legacy built on rot and fear. To anyone else, it looked like ashes. To him, it looked like raw material that could be reshaped into something better. But his eyes were not on the stock ticker glowing silently on his phone. They were fixed on the woman beside him. Simone lay tangled in white sheets, her breathing slow and even, her hair fanned across his pillow. In sleep, she looked unguarded, stripped of the sharp edges she wore so well when awake. Watching her, Do-yoon felt something unfamiliar loosen in his chest, a sense of arrival after a lifetime of running. She stirred and stretched, her body adjusting to consciousness, one small movement at a time. Her eyes fluttered open until they focused on him. There was no surprise in her expression, only warmth, as if waking up to him felt inevitable rather than extraordinary. Did we win? Her voice was rough with sleep, the question more emotional than strategic. Do. Yoon smiled with bone-deep exhaustion mixed with profound relief. He moved closer, the mattress dipping as he crawled back into bed and reclaimed the space between them.
We won the war. Now we have to figure out the peace.
Simone curled into his chest, her head fitting beneath his chin as though she had always belonged there. His heartbeat was steady and grounding, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, her body believed it was safe. I like peace. Peace sounds nice. Do-yoon threaded his fingers through her hair, a nervous habit softened into tenderness. His gaze drifted to the ceiling as a heavier thought surfaced, one that carried the weight of 2 lifetimes.
I have a question. In that other life, did we meet?
The room seemed to hold its breath. Simone did not hesitate, but her answer carried a quiet finality that came from memory rather than imagination. No, you died. They said it was suicide. His arms tightened around her, almost imperceptibly at first. Then, with undeniable force, the word echoed in his mind, heavy and cruel, a reminder of how easily the world erased men like him.
Then this life is the miracle, because I found you.
Simone tilted her head up with a faint, teasing smile that grounded them back in the present. I found you. I broke into your room, remember?
Best home invasion ever.
He leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. The future loomed vast and uncertain, but for once, it did not feel threatening.
What do we do now, Mrs. Han?
Simone smiled without the anger and survival instincts that had once fueled her every move. It was the smile of someone who no longer needed to fight to exist. Now we make sure this timeline is the happy one. The days that followed unfolded like a montage, stitched together by intention rather than fate. Boardrooms were rebuilt with ethics at their core. Sunlight reflected off cobblestone streets in Italy as their laughter melted into the air. Time jumped again to an ultrasound room filled with awe and terror, and then to old age on a park bench, fingers entwined as the world continued without needing to be conquered. They say you only live once. But if you are lucky, and if you are angry enough, sometimes you get a do-over. And sometimes, the second time is the charm.